Hi, this is a quick demo of the Sonar Resource Manager. It's a resource manager for MongoDB databases. And what it does is it monitors all operations occurring within MongoDB instances, and it compares it to a set of rules that define quotas. And if a connection has overrun its quota, for example, its runtime, then it will kill it. It uses current op and kill op in order to do all these things. So what it does is it gets a configuration file that tells it which instances to monitor. It connects to them. It does current op in a certain polling interval, and then it compares it to the rules. And when it needs to terminate something, it does a kill op. So I have a very simple configuration using two machines. I have my Linux machine and I have my Mac. And on the Linux machine, I have right now 3 instances running. I have a 2.2 instance, a 2.4 instance, and a 2.6 instance. And I'm really just going to use my 2.4 instance for this demo. And I have SRM running. SRM is it's a Python utility. It gets 2 configuration files, one telling it where the instances are, and one telling it what the rules that it should enforce are. And then in a demo, I'm going to have 3 different clients, one connecting locally. So I'm going to have a local shell connecting to the database. I'm going to have a remote shell, and I'm going to have JSON Studio, which is a MongoDB application that allows you to run ad hoc queries and do analytics on MongoDB and do visualizations. And it's just another client for me to use in the Resource Manager demo. So the rules that I've defined are in this configuration file. The configuration file is a JSON document, and there are 3 important sections, each being a set of rules. So I have whitelist rules, I have general rules, and I have fall-through rules. And this is how I configure the resource manager to control which connections are allowed to do what. Every rule has 2 sections to it. There's a section that matches things. So I can define a rule to enforce all connections coming from a certain IP address, or all connections coming from a certain subnet and a certain application. And I can say that there are different constraints for doing query operations versus doing aggregation operations, and any of these combinations are valid. So really there are 2 sections, all kinds of match sections, so client operation, app name, time of day, user, all kinds of things, everything that describes a connection. And then there are constraints. So in this case, my constraints are that anything that matches these 3 things, so anything coming from remote being defined as a group of IPs or subnets over here at the top, doing query ops, which in this case are either a query, account, or a distinct, coming from an application by the name of JSON Studio, can only be run for 5 seconds, and I'm only allowed to have 2 concurrent such connections. And if anything bypasses this, so if there's a 3rd connection, or if there's a connection that's over 5 seconds, then I should terminate it. So the rules section is the main section. The other 2, the whitelist and the fall through, allow me to make sure that I get exactly the right behavior. So the whitelist is a set of rules, could have really the same format as in the rule section. And the whitelists list everything that should be allowed to run no matter what. So you would put, for example, your application servers or your main application over here, and it should not at all ever be looked or touched by the SRM. So even if you make a mistake in the rules, it'll not terminate your application. So you'd put all your application connections over there. They are the ones that should be allowed to run for as much time as they need, no matter what. And then the fall through section allows you to define default rules that if nothing else matches, then it's going to match. So for example, maybe in the whitelist you'd put your application. In the rule section you'd say, how much time should connections coming from the application support or the production support team or the business analysts or the data scientists have and be allowed to run. And then everything else should not be allowed to run at all. So you protect yourself against things like denial of service attacks or just unknown connections that may hurt the database. So this is why there are 3 sections. So let me show you what it looks like. And the first thing I'm going to do is utilize this rule over here, which says any query by an application called JSON Studio should only be run for 5 seconds. So let me go and connect through JSON Studio. So I'm going to connect to my database med, which is running on the 2.4 server. And there's a tweets collection over here, which has a little over 5 million documents, and they're pretty sizable documents. So if I do like a regular query and I just hit the play button, it's fine. It'll do the query and it's fast enough because I just got the first 100 documents on the cursor. But now let me do some really stupid query, all right? And this is the type of thing that you would want to protect against if a user does something like this. Say that I click the not exist operator and I double click on the text here. So what's happening, I'm going to try to run a query that says, give me back all the documents that don't have a text field. But the problem is in this collection of 5 million documents, every document has a text field, plus I have no index. Right? If I look at it, there's an index on user location, but there's no index on text. So actually, this is a really bad query. And by the way, here at the top, you see there's a red button. The button turned red. And this has nothing to do with the resource manager. This is just a feature within JSON Studio that warns the user not to do this because it's probably going to run for a long time. But if the user ignores this and clicks the play button anyway, then this query is now sent to the database, and the database is now going to work hard for a really stupid query. So what happened is, you see there's an error message, operation was interrupted while accessing database. And the reason it happened is precisely because of this rule, and this happened after 5 seconds. It actually happens after about 6 seconds because, or anywhere between 5 and 7 seconds, because the resource manager itself has a polling loop. So it may take it a second to run, and then it'll see that it's running, and it'll only kill it if it's more than 5 seconds. So this is the type of interruption that happened because of this rule. Now let me show you what happens when I run the exact same query but from another connection. So I'll copy paste the query because the JSON Studio tells me what query was sent to the database. And I'll log in through the shell this time. I'll log into the same database, really from the same machine, and I'll run the same query. And if I run it, you'll see that it also wasn't interrupted, but it was interrupted much, much quicker. It didn't take 5 seconds. It took 1 second. And the reason this happened is because the shell doesn't match this rule, because this rule has something that says app name is JSON Studio. Therefore, it's not going to match this rule. And it didn't match this rule because this rule is only when you do an aggregation command. And therefore, because it didn't match any rule, and it's not in the whitelist, of course, so because it didn't match any rule whatsoever, this is the rule that was applied, and this rule says maximum runtime is 0, meaning the minute it ran for 1 second, it got terminated. And if I do the exact same from here, for example, right, so if I connect to my database from this shell, and this shell is running locally, right, so if you go back to this picture, this one is the red shell, and this is the green shell, right? So if I run this, same command over here, or same query over here, you'll see that it's going to run. It's going to run for a long time. We can wait 5 seconds, 10 seconds. We can wait a very long time because I don't know how long the query itself is going to run. And the reason nothing happens to this query is because of this rule over here, which is the whitelist, because the whitelist said any connection coming where the client is local, and local is defined as 127.0.0.1, and this is indeed a local connection, then it's a whitelist. Don't do anything about it. And just to show you what happens if I comment this thing out, okay, and save it, and then restart the SRM, then the minute I restart it, then I get the operation interrupted. because at this point it's no longer on the whitelist. The last thing I want to show you is, in addition to interrupting things, it also logs everything that it does. So let me connect to where I'm keeping the log for this thing. So there's a collection called SRM log, and the SRM log will have log entries, each one being a JSON document, for anything that the SRM does. So for example, the first thing that happens, it puts in a document with an action of starting, meaning it started, it read the rule set, it actually prints out everything that it's read and it's going to act upon so that you always know what it's doing. And then every time it takes an action being whatever is written here, and it could be action terminate or it could be action report, then, for example, this is the first document here says, that the query was running for 5 seconds, which is for 6 seconds, which is more than 5 seconds. Therefore, the action it took was to terminate it. It tells you what the query that was running was. It tells you which collection it was running on, how long it was running when it took the action, which client this connection came through, and it gives you a kind of a verbose description of what it did and why it did it. And then this is the second interruption we had with the red shell, which was interrupted after 1 second, which was more than 0 seconds, and the 0 seconds came from the fall through section. And then you see it started again, because this is when I restarted it after I saved the new rules, and right after that, it terminated this query, which was running for 43 seconds, right? Because it was running for a while before I restarted it after taking it out from the whitelist. And after I took it out of the whitelist, then the rule that applied was the fall through, and it terminated it because it was running 43 seconds, which is more than 0 seconds. So everything that the SRM does gets logged. And generally, the best practice is, when you put a new rule set in, you should probably run it with an action of report before you put an action of terminate, just so you get all your rule sets right. And there's also a simulation mode within the SRM. So after the SRM starts, you can just run an experiment. You don't even have to have the connections up and running. You can say, okay, what are you going to do if a connection comes up from this IP, from this application, querying this collection at this time of day, and then it'll tell you what it's doing. So that was a very simple demo of the Sonar Resource Manager. Thank you.